Namaskar. Well, friends, let me extend a warm welcome to all of you to Bhim Bhashya, my audio video podcast series on Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar. This audio video podcast series has 54 short speeches unraveling as many as 25 different dimensions of the multifaceted genius that Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar was. Friends, this podcast series is focused on Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar, his thoughts, his actions, his philosophy, and above all, the grand vision about India, about our country that he had shown. This is what this podcast series is all about. If you like this podcast series, please like, share, and subscribe. So let's move on to the episode 4 of this podcast series. The focus of this episode 4 is on the first big book on economics that Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar wrote at the age of 26. This all-important book is titled The Evolution of Provincial Finances in British India. This book is based on Bhim Ambedkar's PhD dissertation, which was submitted to Columbia University in United States. The year was 1917. The book represents Bhim Ambedkar's pioneering contribution in the field of public finance in the broader discipline of economics. Essentially, the dissertation is focused on a subject of great relevance even today, and that is center-state financial relationship. This book by Bhim Ambedkar deals with center-state financial relationship in British India during the period 1833 to 1921. Please note that what we call states now were called provinces later. Earlier, they were called provinces. So this book deals with center-state financial relationship in British India during the period 1833 to 1921. And in doing so, Dr. Ambedkar presents a seminal contribution. Dr. Ambedkar presents a seminal contribution to the origin, development, and mechanism of provincial finance in British India. Please note here that under British, the states were called provinces. The imperial system of government prevailed in India from the year 1833. A crucial part of this imperial system of government was imperial system of finance, which was based on complete centralization. The imperial system of finance was characterized what Dr. Ambedkar calls injurious taxes and quote-unquote extravagant expenditures. For example, the land tax was exceptionally high. Land was deemed to be owned by the government and cultivator was not the proprietor but merely occupier of the land. This was nothing but state landlordism. That is what prevailed under the British rule. Custom duties on exports were very high. They were aimed at hurting the native manufacturers. This meant a perpetual inadequacy of resources for the government. On the other hand, the limited resources were spent by the government on maintenance of what Dr. Ambedkar calls pomp and privilege. For example, 52% to 82% of limited resources that the government had, they were spent on war services. If you think that large part of this expenditure must be going to native Indians, you would be absolutely wrong. Dr. Ambedkar explains that one European would draw salaries larger than 4 Indian soldiers. On one hand, there was a very large expenditure on war services, but on the other, there was hardly any expenditure on education and public works. This invariably led to recurring budget deficits for the government. Dr. Ambedkar argued that even the administration of the government finance was very poor. De jure, that is officially, there was an imperial system of government, but de facto, that is in effect, administration was conducted primarily by and through the provinces, with imperial government acting only as a coordinating body. According to Dr. Ambedkar, imperial government was responsible in law but did not administer the country, whereas provincial governments were administering the country but they had no responsibility in law. That was the very strange disconnect. Expenditure budgets were prepared by provincial governments, but the responsibility of finding resources to finance them, that was entrusted to the government of India. This naturally led to extravagant demands for expenditure by provinces. But government of India, they did not have the necessary machinery to apprise the demands made by the provinces. As a result, government of India often had to accept, because they did not have any machinery to verify, to assess, to adjudge the correctness of the demands made by the provinces, government of India often had to accept whatever extravagant demands that were made by the provincial governments. Not surprisingly, therefore, government of India finances continued to remain under severe strain. Eventually, by the year 1871, it was realized that provincial governments must draw their own revenue and expenditure budgets. Accordingly, the regime of provincial budgets came into being for the first time in the year 1871. Dr. Ambedkar then analyzes in detail the development of provincial finance. So far, we were talking about the evolution of provincial finance. Now we are now talking about the development of provincial finance. For the next 5 decades, 3 different alternative fiscal arrangements for provincial finance prevailed in our country. First was budget by assignment. Under this scheme, certain taxes such as police, education, roads, medical services, etc., they were delegated to provincial budgets, and the revenues collected from these services were handed over to the provinces. In addition, lump sum assignments were also provided by the government of India to provinces to cover their expenditure needs. This system lasted for only 5 years. Actually, the financial year 1871-72 to 1876-77. The second system that was brought in was called budget by assigned revenues. Under this scheme, certain revenues were assigned to the provinces and a special provision was made for adjusting assignment. In other words, resources for the provinces comprise three things. One, receipts from delegated services. Second, yield of the revenue that was assigned. And the third was, of course, the adjusting assignment. This scheme also lasted for 5 years, that is from financial year 1877-78 to the financial year 1881 to 82. Then came a system that lasted for 40 years. That was from financial year 1882-83 to financial year 1920-21. This system was called budget by shared revenues. Under this scheme, heads of account on the revenue and expenditure were grouped into three different categories. One, wholly imperial. Second, wholly provincial. And third, jointly imperial and provincial. And that was shared in some fixed proportions. This scheme actually worked very well, and it worked for nearly 40 years. The scheme came to an end because of the Reforms Act of 1919. It was decided to put in place, quote unquote, responsible government of a limited character. So there was beginning of a responsible government, although of a limited character. The Act of 1919 specified devolution rules under which provinces were given an acknowledged authority of their own in respect of 52 services and items of administration, and mechanisms and principles were laid down to address two difficult issues. One, allocating revenue resources between central government and provinces, and how to make for central government deficit. Dr. Ambedkar presents a detailed and insightful account of all these developments. In fact, Dr. Ambedkar's supervisor, Professor Edwin Seligman, says in the foreword to the book, and I quote, he says, "The value of Mr. Ambedkar's contribution lies in objective recitation of the facts and impartial analysis of the interesting developments in his native country. The lessons are applicable to other countries as well. Nowhere," he said, "nowhere to my knowledge has such a detailed study of the underlying principles made," unquote. In other words, Professor Seligman, who was a well-known authority in public finance, said that what Dr. Ambedkar had done in his PhD dissertation, which was published as a book that we talked about, although it is about India, it is applicable to number of countries at the same time. And he said that nowhere to my knowledge such a detailed analysis of the underlying principle has been made. As a matter of fact, coming down to how is this book relevant to India even today? Is that important only because it's a part of the ancient economic history? No, it's very relevant even today. Why? I'll explain why. In India, we have a finance commission that is appointed every 5 years. What is the job of the finance commission? The finance commission makes recommendations about sharing tax and non-tax revenue between the central government and the state. So far, 15 finance commissions have submitted their report, and the 16th finance commission is being appointed. In my view, the guiding spirit for all the 15 Finance Commission's reports is the seminal work done by Dr. Ambedkar nearly 100 years ago. Most people are fully aware of Finance Commission. Regrettably, very few are aware that the underlying seminal work was done by none other than Dr. Baba Saheb Ambedkar. Well, friends, I think we can stop here today. In the next episode of Bhim Bhashya, that is episode 5, I am going to present Dr. Ambedkar's path-breaking contribution to agricultural sector in our country. If you like this audio video podcast series Bhim Bhashya, please like it, share it and subscribe it. Thank you. Dhanyavad. So long until we meet again real soon. Namaskar.